In this video we're going to go over a representational drawing technique called sighting and measuring. And while many of you have learned the gridding method of drawing something realistically, I'm going to show you a different method that you can use. And this way you're not bound to having the picture be the same size as your painting or drawing. And you can use this technique when you're trying to draw something from life. So when you're looking at something in 3 dimensions, you can use sighting and measuring to accurately draw something in 2 dimensions or on your piece of paper. So there's lots of positives to this method, and it's one you'll see if you take any post-secondary art classes. So it's good to practice now. So I have my identity still life here, and I'm going to start with one object in it. I'm going to start with a lighter pencil. I'm going to use one that's dark enough for you to see, though, so I'm going to use a B pencil, or 2B would be a good idea as well. So I'm going to start with my mannequin here, and I'm going to kind of look. I want to draw a scene that's relative to this. It's okay with me if I start drawing a little bit larger or whatnot, but if I do, I need to know that I won't get everything onto my piece of paper the same way that it is here. We're just really focusing on proportions and not exactly size with sighting and measuring. So I'm going to begin by drawing a few shapes here to get going, and then I'm going to start measuring angles off of each other and comparing occupied and unoccupied space for similarities. So right now I'm just going to use a method that you learned in drawing and painting once. I'm just kind of breaking objects down into shapes. I'm getting parts of his body in here so that I have something to go off of. Now that, can you see that? I'll use a 4B pencil. Alright, that's a little bit better. So now that I've recorded a few shapes, I'm going to start my sighting and measuring process. And part of that process involves measuring angles on your picture, your photographic reference with your pencil or with your finger, and then moving that angle over to your drawing. So I see that the head comes up a little bit like this. This comes over, down, around. There's an angle right here. For those of you who really liked learning proportions and how different fractions with different numbers can add up or equal the same thing, proportional drawing, sighting and measuring is a lot like that. For those of you that didn't necessarily like that, there's still something in this technique for you. Alright, so I've measured my angles, brought them over, measured them again here, and then recorded them on my piece of paper. Another thing that I can do to ensure proportional accuracy is measure pieces of my whole against each other or in comparison to each other. So for example, I'm going to use my fingers because that's a little bit easier to me. If I measure this guy's head right here, not including his neck, and I move that head down, so I'm keeping my fingers straight and not moving. So I'm going to move that down. I notice that this guy's head or gal's head is the same size as his or her torso. So I'm going to come over here, measure my head, move down, measure my head, move down. It looks like this is proportionally accurate when compared to the photo. So I can do that too with the torso. I can measure that up. I know that these two things are right now, so I can measure, bring that up. It's probably about 3/4 the size. So if I come up here, yep, that looks about right. So knowing that, I'm going to continue to draw, and then I'm going to continue to base the rest of my drawing, his limbs, his arms, his legs, against this area because I know that that area is correct. I can also achieve proportional accuracy by measuring angles. So for example, I want to see if this is in the right place. I can measure the edge of this arm or shoulder joint with the left bottom side of his torso. And if I measure, looks like an angle about like that. If I come over and see, that looks about right. Actually, I realize that I should bring this down and around just a little bit. I can measure the top of the shoulders with the bottom of the torso, angle like that. Now I see that this maybe should come out just a little bit more. You'll notice that my drawing here is larger than my picture appears here, and the nice thing about sighting and measuring is that's okay. We just want to make sure that they're proportionally accurate. We're not really worrying about size. I'm going to measure the arm right here, so it goes at an angle like this, and I'm going to make a shape and then go over it with my contour line. And then this elbow joint is about parallel with this, like the abdomen or the waist of my figure. So that looks about right. And then the angle changes, goes about right here. So I'm going to come and make a circle. And then this arm here stretches down to about, if I measure that, like the middle of this circle right here, which I've not drawn. So I need to realize here that I need to make that forearm a little bit longer. And then this shape comes up like this a little bit more. So creating these hip joints, I suppose. Measuring my angle. Measuring this direction of the leg, so coming like that. Sometimes I just draw a line and then I'll measure again. This technique might in the beginning take you a longer time, but I learned this when I was a teenager and I've drawn this way for several years, and I'm going a little bit slower because I'm demonstrating, but I was really thankful that I learned this. And it gets quicker the more that you do it, the more that you practice it. You can achieve realistic drawing if you just keep practicing this technique. So let's measure his, I need some more information. So let's measure his wrist joint with his knee joint. If we come here, there's an angle like that. I move it over, I lift it up, move it over, it's the same, so we're good there. And let's see if I measure his leg, his upper leg with his lower leg, we realize that that's the same size. So I'm just going to come down and make a mark here where that should end. Keep in mind, if you do want to include everything in your still life that you put in there, you will want to try to draw the same size. And then his shoe about right there. So his hand comes down like that. Measure the outside of his hand to the inside of his knee. Oh, and I realize his hand comes out a little bit more here, so I'm going to make this a little bit thicker and this come out a little bit more. Okay, so I'll just finish up with this leg here, and then we'll get into how you add other objects. And the more objects that you add, the further along you get in your composition, the easier it's going to be to see inaccuracies, to fix them, and to create something that's really proportionally accurate. I do a lot of representational drawing and painting, and I have never started a still life like this and then never made any corrections. So if you get to a point where you have to readjust something or even redraw a part of your composition, look at it as a learning experience and find solidarity in the fact that just about every artist does it at some point in whatever they're creating. Part of the process. So measuring that, that looks okay. That will put his arm. Try and hurry up here. First making those circles. Let's measure from the tip of his hand to the top of his head, and I'm throwing out measurements here, and by no means do you have to remember these certain ones, but the important thing is that you find 2 points. You measure the angle both on your reference photo and then on your drawing. It could be any combination of points. Just matters about the angle. Alright, so this guy's looking pretty good. I'm kind of realizing that his foot juts out a little bit more like that, so I would move that over just a little bit. There we go, that looks a little bit better. So now that we have something placed in its entirety, I would do a few more angle checks, just making sure that this is as perfect as I can get it, because I'm going to measure the rest of my composition off of existing drawings, which means this guy or gal right here. So from here I'm going to draw this canister, and when you're adding additional pieces of information into your drawing, you want to not only pay attention to the occupied space, so the space where your objects are, you want to pay attention to the unoccupied space, or the space in the background. Some people call this positive and negative space. It always made more sense to me to call it occupied and unoccupied. So just know that those terms are synonymous with one another. And once I draw this, I'm measuring my angle here. I see that this is kind of at a little bit of a slant, which I don't think I would have realized if I had just gone ahead and drawn it without talking. I'm talking through all of this because I'm demonstrating to you, but in all honesty, sometimes I talk through my sighting and measuring just like this when I'm alone in a studio. So if you need to kind of talk through it, know that that's okay too. So I'm going to create this here. And I'm not going to create any shading right now. I just want to get the proportions down. So here's the beginnings of my blick jar. Let's see, that kind of comes up a little bit more like that. Now I want to pay attention to this space right here, this black space, and see if this is the same shape as over here, because sometimes our eyes get really sick of looking at the same thing. We're always looking for that positive or occupied space, and the negative or unoccupied space is a lot of times telling, because it kind of flips a switch, so to speak, in your brain. That is not at all scientific, so don't repeat it outside of an art room. It kind of flips a switch, so to speak, to have your brain look at things a little bit differently. And then sometimes you can catch inaccuracies that you otherwise wouldn't have. I find that a lot. In my artwork, it's just kind of like if you're working on a portrait and you've ever heard to flip the portrait upside down, it's the same kind of technique. So I'm going to find some points of measurement. Let's see. I could measure here to here. That looks about right. I could measure from this outside point to the crown of the head. That looks correct. This isn't that complex of a shape, so I think that those measurements, along with just kind of visually judging it and assessing, and then assessing this unoccupied space, is enough to move on from there. So I would keep going, measuring my angles. And I'm going to create this picture frame, and then we can call it a day. So I see that the top of this picture frame comes and then covers up part of his stand, goes at an angle like this. I have the angle, but then I notice here this form, or rather the picture frame, is overlapping my Blick printing ink here. So I realize that I need to make this jar go down a little bit more. I need to make it a little bit longer. So no big deal. As I said, I've never ever done this without having to change something, and you'd be hard pressed to find an artist who has. So measuring again those angles. This stops about right here because we have this line that comes in, which I'm going to create right now. It starts here, goes down. So it starts at his elbow. Have to make that a little bit more out. And then comes down to his foot, and then that's my book, and then cuts across. His hand is kind of resting on the book, and then this canvas starts about right here, and then measuring that comes down and then cuts off that picture frame. So we're starting to pay attention to how objects overlap each other, and in a still life, the objects that are always closest to the viewer or closer to the viewer are going to overlap objects that are behind the viewer. So make sure that you're paying attention to and recording to the best of your ability overlapping and underlapping of objects. So here's my start of my still life, and like I said, you can use this technique not only when you're drawing in 2 dimensions, but you can use it when you are looking at something in real life. If you wanted to go outside and draw observationally, if you took a portraiture class, if you want to draw a still life from a scene that you set up at home, there's a lot to be learned there. Hope you enjoyed, and happy drawing.